27 years ago, an entire class of young students vanished during a school trip, disappearing without a trace and leaving their family shattered. Authorities suspected the male teacher, who had disappeared with them, was involved. But with no bodies found and few leads to pursue, the investigation eventually went cold. Yet through all these years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the small chance that her son was still out there somewhere. Then, one day, while looking through old photographs, she noticed a crucial detail that had been overlooked, a detail that would change the entire case and shock everyone involved in ways no one could have imagined. Margaret Maggie Porter woke up on the morning of September 28, 2023, with a heavy heart. The gray, overcast sky outside her window mirrored the somber mood that had settled over her. She had been preparing herself for this day, but even after all these years, the grief and heartache remained as raw as ever. It had been exactly 27 years since her son, Daniel, had vanished. Slowly, Maggie rose from her bed and made her way to the dressing table. Hanging on the mirror was a close-up photo of Daniel in his school uniform. She gently took the picture in her hands, her eyes welling with tears as she gazed at her son's smiling face. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. But Maggie quickly took a deep breath, steadying herself against the wave of sorrow threatening to engulf her. She had endured the worst of times over the past 27 years and knew she had to stay strong. After washing her face and getting dressed, she checked her phone. A message from her best friend, Susan Donovan, was waiting for her. "You're not alone in this. We all remember. If you need company, come over anytime." Susan was also a mother of one of the vanished children. Over the years, their shared grief had forged an unbreakable bond between them. Maggie felt a small comfort knowing that someone else truly understood her pain. She replied, asking if she could come over now. Susan's response was immediate and welcoming. Before leaving, Maggie gathered a few packets of Earl Grey lavender tea and a jar of cookies from her collection. The thought of arriving empty-handed at her friend's house didn't sit well with her, even after all these years. The neighborhood was quiet as she walked the familiar streets. The houses looked much the same as they had 27 years ago, a stark contrast to how much her life had changed. As she approached Susan's house, just a few blocks from her own, she saw the front door open before she could even knock. Susan greeted her with a warm, understanding smile and pulled her into a comforting hug. "Come in," she said softly, ushering Maggie inside. Maggie handed Susan the cookie jar and tea packets as they made their way to the kitchen. Susan busied herself boiling water for the tea while Maggie settled onto the living room sofa. The familiar surroundings provided a small measure of comfort on this difficult day. As they waited for the water to boil, Susan turned to Maggie and asked gently, "How are you doing?" Maggie sighed, her eyes downcast. "I'm trying to keep up. You know how it is. This day is always the hardest." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Even though I've learned to live with it, the past still haunts me, especially today." Susan nodded in understanding. "Same for me. Remember, I completed therapy last year. While I've accepted the past and try to rein in all the what-ifs that used to eat me alive, I can't deny that today is especially hard. I'm not sure if that means I need to go back to therapy." The kettle whistled, and Susan poured the hot water into 2 cups, bringing them to the coffee table in front of the sofa. The comforting aroma of Earl Grey and lavender filled the air, providing a small moment of peace in the midst of their shared grief. They sipped their tea in silence, their bond requiring no words. But then Susan broke the quiet with a hesitant suggestion. "You know, my psychologist told me something that's been helpful. We should face our pain whenever it comes and accept it as part of ourselves, not try to hide or bypass it." She paused before continuing, "I was thinking maybe we could look at some old photos together. If you're up for it, of course." Maggie took another sip of her tea, letting the warm liquid soothe her. After a moment, she nodded. "I think it might be good." Susan stood up and walked to the TV cabinet, pulling out a photo album. She returned to the sofa and sat close to Maggie, placing the album between them. As they flipped through the pages, Memories washed over them. The photos chronicled happier times, their children's first day of school, birthday parties, family picnics. Maggie and Susan found themselves sharing stories, their voices a mixture of laughter and tears. "Do you remember when Daniel and Nathan first started at that school?" Maggie asked, pointing to a picture of the two boys in their uniforms. Susan nodded, a wistful smile on her face. "Fifth grade, wasn't it?" The school had only been open for 2 years at that point. "That's right," Maggie confirmed. "I remember how small the class was at first, just 6 students. But by the end of that year, it had grown to 15. The school really put a lot of effort into marketing, didn't they?" Susan mused. All those discounted fees to attract parents. They continued flipping through the album when Maggie's eyes landed on a photo she had never seen before. It showed Daniel and Nathan, along with some classmates, working on a science project during the school's annual fair. The children's faces were alight with enthusiasm, completely unaware of the tragedy that would befall them. "This picture, it's beautiful," Maggie murmured. "Where did you get it?" Susan looked at the photo and explained, "I got it from the police a few months ago. Since the case went cold, they allowed parents to collect copies of evidence materials. I went down to the station and requested everything they had." Maggie was surprised. "I didn't know we could do that. If I had known, I would have asked for copies too." Susan gave her a sad smile. "Maybe it's better that you didn't. To be honest, having all this evidence has made it harder for me to move on. That's part of why I needed therapy. I spent so many sleepless nights poring over those files, looking for something, anything, that might give us answers." As they continued looking through the photos, Maggie came across another unfamiliar image. It was a class picture taken in front of a yellow school bus, the very bus that had taken the children on that fateful trip. Maggie studied the photo intently, her eyes scanning each face. Suddenly, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. She sat up straighter. "Susan, why is Principal Linda Holloway in this picture?" "I thought Mr. Becker, the classroom teacher, went alone with the kids that day." Susan leaned in to look at the photo more closely. "You know, I'm not sure. Some parents mentioned rumors that the staff member was an assistant, but actually the principal herself. I never gave it much thought." Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. All these years, she had believed it was just the teacher and an aide. The presence of the principal in this photo raised questions she had never considered before. A cold chill ran through her. What else had they missed?